right, welcome everyone. Good morning. Welcome to Mason Square. All right, this is our Arlington campus for George Mason University. And I don't know if you saw the building next door. So that is going to be the Fuse. And it opens in about, May or June. So, and that is going to be the new headquarters for the Baroni Center come the summer. So you'll be seeing a lot of the Fuse. This space will stay available, but really excited to have you here at our Mason Square campus. And I want to welcome you to this event. We're really thrilled to partner with NDIA and the Emerging Technologies Institute on this research and this event. I really look forward to your involvement. First, a little word. What is the Baroni Center? The Baroni Center is the first of its kind university research center focusing on the business, policy, regulatory issues that you all face every day. How we do prototyping, how we do intellectual property, how we do budget reform, things like that. And so we do that through research, like the report that you all have. We do training and education, and then we do events like today. So we do them webinars and the like. And a couple of events upcoming. We have an event upcoming. We're partnering with the National Veteran Small Business Coalition on veterans access to capital, and that's going to be March. That's going to be on St. Patrick's Day, right here, same bat time, same bat channel. And then we're doing a series of webinars around the impacts of Doge, which is, I understand, a four-letter word for some people. So we'll be having that, and those have been we should be announcing our next one very shortly. So I'll let you know that you're going to have a QR code that's going to come up here shortly. That'll be your way to submit questions. And we'll look forward to your engagement. But I'll turn over to my partner in crime, Mr. Guy Swan, who's the, I'm sorry, what's your last name?
Walsh.
Sorry, Guy Walsh.
The other guy.
The other guy. No. Guy Swan is with, he's at USA, right? So that's right. So, and unfortunately, Guy has a different educational handicap, which we could talk about separately. But he's the executive vice president for NDIA, and so really excited to have you here.
Thanks, Jerry. Appreciate it.
Awesome.
Good morning. So again, Guy Walsh, I'm executive vice president over at National Defense Industrial Association. First, thank you for being here, because exactly what Jerry just explained. Our whole role is creating these ethical communications between government, industry, and academia. So first, it's pretty neat to be back here at GMU. I've had the opportunity when I was with U.S. Cyber Command, working with George Mason on numerous type projects. I know I talked to Jeff and some other folks earlier. We still work with the rapid prototyping for GMU over across the street. And again, NDIA has about 54, 55 academic partners that include many, many R1 universities. We're hopefully going to add George Mason to that list here shortly with our group there. But again, NDIA is really all about, we've got more than 1,700 corporate members. 70% of those are small businesses, right? And going through all the challenges that we did. We're about creating outcomes. For those who've been watching, first of all, this week, you may have seen our CEO, Honorable David Norquist, testifying with the House Armed Services Committee, a biannual testimony that David's done now a second year in a row on the health of the industrial base. And so that was a big, at the same time that was happening, our executive vice president for strategy and policy, Jen Stewart, and ML Mackey, who leads our small business division, were over meeting with the small business committee to help reauthorize SBIRs and STTRs, technology transfers. That is really how we engage with our universities and small business. So that's just in this week. I know I was talking to Drew earlier. We just had our tactical wheeled vehicle conference this week. I think it concluded yesterday. And then earlier last week, we had our special operations conference. So a lot of different of these conferences and activities that we put on to make that happen. So with that, the other part of that, we put out a monthly magazine. So for those who are not already members of NDIA, most of the work, in all honesty, is done by NDIA, by our volunteers. We have 27 different divisions that are focused on areas, everything from armament to robotics, cybersecurity. We just stood up our newest one, which is data analytics and enterprise platform. And I see Suzette is here. She's leading one of our divisions. I know James Chu is closing our panel today. He's leading our another one of our divisions. So if you're not already a member of NDIA, please talk to one of those. I see John Wasson over here, one of our board members. And with that, it is my privilege to introduce the Honorable Ellen Lord, former Undersecretary for the Defense for Acquisition Logistics, also our former Vice Chair for NDIA. So with that, Ellen, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Guy, and thank you to the Baroni Center. Thank you to the Emerging Technologies Institute at NDIA. I think it's really incredibly important to have these organizations that can convene government, industry, and academia. It's great to see so many colleagues here. Thank you, Arun, for all the work you're doing at ETI. Looking forward to this conversation about prototyping, because we are in a state of play here where we have all kinds of emerging global threats. We know that the pacing threat is China, and China is very quickly developing capability with civil military fusion. It's rather easy to focus funds where they are needed. We also have an incredible amount of technology emerging out of the commercial sector, and the government, the US government, has to determine how we quickly use all of those congressional authorities to get capability fielded quickly through acquisitions in a what I will call creatively compliant way. We tend to sometimes take a little too long to move from idea to prototype to fielding. So it's critical to talk about this whole issue of prototyping. I'm very lucky to have two esteemed colleagues here today, John Young and Doug Bush. They can tell you as we begin a little bit about their military service and what they've done at DoD. But so let's just begin and talk about prototyping. And this study that's being published today that you will hear a lot about talks about all the definitions of prototyping and so forth and so on. So the team will get into that, but let's get right into the applications here. So John, starting with you, after you give everybody a little bit of your background, can you talk about what you think the role of prototyping is in fielding capability?
Great. Thank you, Ellen, for getting us started. Thanks to the center to sponsor the discussion. This is a subject near and dear to my heart from both my days on Capitol Hill as an appropriator for 10 years, reviewing R&D budgets. And then I spent time as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, Acquisition, then as DD&E when that job was still there, the Director of Defense Research and Engineering, and then lastly as the Undersecretary for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. So a great run. I had a blast there. I hope all of you are having the same experience in trying to move programs to the warfighter, which is the fundamental question. The holy grail in the world of government and outside is a program of record. And I think 4 fundamental ingredients to get a program of record to the warfighter would be requirements, technology, manufacturability, and reasonable cost. Carefully considered prototypes, and that's really the important piece, essentially serve this purpose and provide insight on all of these ingredients, because you get a sense of the reasonableness of the requirements. You can get a readiness for the technology. You need to figure out if you can manufacture this concept or prototype, and we need better estimates of the cost so we go into a program. I mean, recently you all seen one Nunn-McCurdy that missed by a factor of 2. I feel like we shouldn't be doing that. And at the prototyping stage, we can and should have competition. I was an advocate in the revision of DoD 5000 when I was the Undersecretary to mandate competitive prototyping, because I believe it's a critical way to build a foundation for a program. And then well-executed prototypes let the operator test their operational concepts and make sure what we're trying to do is going to do exactly what we want, serve the warfighter. So I believe it's fundamental to the success of an acquisition program, and it's fundamental to moving technology forward and doing, as Ellen mentioned, adaptation of so much emerging technology out there to our defense purposes.
All right, Doug, perhaps a little background being fresh out here. It'll come on automatically.
Okay. So, yeah, hey, good morning, everyone. So, Doug Bush, an Army officer long ago for a short time, and then congressional staffer for 19 years, then Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology for the past 4 years, finishing up on the 20th. So, yeah, happy to talk about this. It's interesting because I saw, and I think one of the things I didn't quite realize when I went into the Pentagon was the degree to which aligning the three things that a program has to happen, which are the requirements folks in the service have. Someone's got to want something. Someone's got to want it. The money, critically, and then the acquisition techniques that interact with those other two. And in this case, prototyping, I found in those 4 years was often, especially the new prototyping authority that Congress passed, and then Ellen's team kind of made real with the machinery in the department. Rapid prototyping was often the best way to do what I think Congress wanted, which was to take technology industry had taken a long way down the road already, fine tune it, and get it into production quickly, much more quickly than kind of the standard 7-year model. And in the Army, we were able to do that in some cases in 2 years in one case with a new weapon, 4 years with a light tank. So these are rapid timelines for taking things from prototype to, no kidding, actual production of, things that are going to get fielded. So I think the expansion of prototyping from just, and the report actually gets into this, which is really good. It's not all the same. There's what I would almost call demonstrations, which are prototyping with perhaps a lab-built thing, something that like 5 PhDs took 5 months to assemble, which is like a proof of concept type prototyping. But I think the evolution has been toward high-fidelity prototyping at scale, which I think is more money, but also helps industry do more faster and helps the services see the potential of a system much more clearly than something just that's sitting on a lab bench. So I think that this evolution of prototyping, this Army certainly skewed heavily to that right side of that spectrum of high fidelity prototyping at scale to get a quicker bridge to production is one of the big successes, bipartisan one, frankly, over 2 administrations to move the dial in that direction. So I saw that happen in real life a lot, and it did produce, no kidding, stuff in the hands of troops ready to go to war much faster than we would have done otherwise. So I think it's one of the big success stories of recent times.
Great, thank you. So it's interesting, you both skewed towards what I call high-end systems where DoD needs to be involved in developing. Yet here we have not just the JSIDS process and typical programs of record, but we have other transaction authorities, we have middle tier of acquisition, we have a lot of ways to field capability quickly. And there's an interesting question of, can prototyping mean taking a commercially viable technology and then perhaps getting some experiential learning to harden it, if you will, to be combat ready. But one of the great things about the system we have here is all of you can give us questions, and I have 2 of them that I will turn to right now. They're both anonymous. The first one is, what are your favorite DoD sources of funding for startups looking for prototype funding? And then I'm going to save the second one. Let's start with that one. I'll go back to you, Doug, and let you go first on this one. It's your favorite sources of funding for startups.
Favorite's a funny term in this case, in this context. Frankly, anything I could find was my approach. If there was, if you could like actually find a source of funding that was, where you were not violating congressional intent with it, check the boxes on the law, we're good. Really, anything you can find would be my answer to that, for especially for.
Where do you think you can go and find it then? What are
So-
good places to look?
Yeah, so the most flexible funding the department has, in some ways, the program executive offices I had the privilege to oversee did have some of their own 6-4 money that was more flexible than, it wasn't tied to programs that they could use. That was one general pot. The other one was really the 6-3 money residing in the kind of the Army Futures Command and the labs in the Army, that funding. That was where you had the most wiggle room. If it was something that just kind of came in off the street, or A tool we use sometimes was just rapid, I call it kind of rapid reprogramming, which was go find a source somewhere else. Say there's an O&M, unexecutable pot of O&M money toward the end of the year, get it moved into R&D, move out
Yeah.
with a prototype
So I
effort.
can't help myself, having given 24 months of my life to the PPBE Commission, planning, programming, budgeting, and execution, when Arun was my battle buddy on that, one of our recommendations was to increase the amount that's allowed to be moved in below threshold reprogramming, because for 20 years, it was not moved to keep up with the pace of inflation. So the ability to move that money has been somewhat constrained. And if we're trying to really delegate authorities to the PEOs and PMs, we need to do that. I'm going to ask you one quick follow-up question, Doug, on the 3 areas you said to go look. People generally understand what you're talking about, but the question is, who do they go and talk to? Because as we all know, there are lots of people that do not have decision authority or budget authority in the building or wherever they might be at DoD, but they'll talk to you and you don't realize as industry that they really can't help you. It's kind of opinion, but that's it. So who, for those 3 sources, should industry startups particularly go talk to?
Well, certainly for the funding the PEO's control, one of the innovations predated me, but it's still there, is each of the program executive offices in the Army created these local consortia, which are like, $50 to join, and you actually get to learn about opportunities and get more in the know than just, relying on just, sam.gov announcements about what's coming and who to partner with. So I think those industry partners working with at the PEO level with those consortia that we established for each PEO, that is a easy way to get in the
Great.
door.
And I just have to say a shout out to the National Armaments Consortium,
There's
whose
one.
leader is right here. So at break, you should talk to Ben and figure out what the NAC can do for you.
So second one, the Army, the services have their S&T activities. Each one you kind of got is really kind of a separate entity. Now in the Army, we have a 4-star command, a military command over it that is an entree, a way into that world in kind of one place, an Army Futures Command. So that 6-3 funding path, also often starting there, isn't a bad idea. The other one's pretty hard. It takes top-down leadership push. It's got to be usually something kind of urgent, but we've done it. When the war in the Middle East kicked off, we used a newly created Rapid Acquisition Authority, which was really, I'd call it Rapid Reprogramming Authority, that Congress had given us to quickly get money on contract in a matter of weeks for some counter-UAS technology that industry had brought us that we didn't even know about, using that ability to move money that Congress
But who
gave
did
us.
people go to find out about that?
So in that case, it kind of came up through, in that case, in the Army, there was PEO Missiles in Space, but also the Army, the Joint Counter-UAS Office, the JCO, became aware of it, brought us the problem set. It also comes from combatant commands. Sometimes they will surface something that they already are looking at in the field. When the system's working well, really all those sources and voices are in the room, and then
Right.
we have to make it happen.
So if industry lets a COCOM or a PEO know the art of the possible in terms of technology internally within DoD, they have ways to get back to the acquisition authorities.
It does, got to be the squeaky wheel.
Yeah, we're good at that. Okay, we're gonna let you squeak it here a bit, John. The question is, what are your favorite DoD sources of funding for startups?
I was, I just spent some time through the transition process, and I find there's a remarkable amount of money in the Pentagon. Now, people every day don't quite feel that way, but obviously lots of ideas go to DARPA. There's some unique places where people have significant amounts of money with flexibility. DARPA would be one of them, but there's been an explosion of rapid capability, rapid acquisition, rapid prototyping offices, DIU, and the Pentagon that have managed to have a great deal of flexibility with their money and be able to pursue these innovative and emergent ideas. In my time, that was a lot harder. There was one group of one pot of money, so to speak, for DDR&E with a guy named Ben Riley, and Ben just did some amazing things with that. But that's exploded. So I think there's actually more opportunities to find money these days, and you have to do it the way Doug said, hopefully interest a user or a combatant command, and they can help you lean into these people that have flexibility of money, and that the service S&T levels, they have a substantial amount of money. So there's a lot of different ways. This is an area where I think there's any number of ways to try to accomplish this.
I think you're bringing up a really good point, John. Over the last 10 years or so, a little bit longer, there are a lot of different niche capability offices, if you will. It used to be just DARPA was sort of the creative compliance generator, but now we have the rapid capabilities offices, we have the Defense Innovation Unit, we have lots of different people that are trying to lean forward. Okay, so let's get comfortable getting uncomfortable here with this next question. Another anonymous. And John, we're going to put you on the spot first, and you've got to answer this rapidly.
Okay.
Who has been the best at prototyping, OSD or the services? And then please rank the services.
Wow.
Yeah, okay, so don't think too much, just answer.
I'm sitting right here,
Yeah.
but go ahead.
Pretty sure Doug will have an opinion about this. I, and I hesitate to offend him, but
No, it's fine.
I have some experiences in the past where the Army can be very deliberate about their processes. I think Ukraine and other events of the world have changed that substantially. So I'm going to cheat and say the services are pretty equal, but they're usually lined up trying hard to solve problems for the warfighter. And I find OSD, even though I was party to that, to not be as responsive to the warfighting opportunities.
Shockingly. Okay. Doug.
Well, I mean, the Army number one, obviously, by like a factor of 10. No, actually, as over my entire career as a staffer as well, having watched a lot, actually all the services in critical areas, and especially frankly in classified programs, are actually really good at this. On
So
occasion.
give us a couple success stories, just really quickly.
Oh, sure. So, well, okay, not classified. All right. So, well, the Army for example, in counter UAS. All right. So, October 7th happened, and then the U.S. military came under significant UAS attack across the Middle East. And yes, we took losses. There were lots of attacks, hundreds of attacks. Hundreds of lives were saved, though, by the previous 5 years of work across 2 administrations working with CENTCOM on a range of really, frankly, off-the-shelf, highly innovative, not program of record counter-UAS technologies that had been quietly fielded across the theater because of this building threat from Iran and its proxies. That's a huge success, and that happened completely off the normal system. And then the Army and working with the other services too, had their stuff, Air Force and Navy as well, it wasn't just the Army, have built on that dramatically since. So that's an example of we saw the threat in advance. We used creative ways to get stuff there quickly, not just the same old, and it saved lives. That's one big one, I would argue. The other one has been in our attempt to rapidly move into unmanned aircraft and unmanned systems. Some of that really got a huge push by just the military watching what's happening in Ukraine and kind of finding religion on that and finally moving out on it. But using all those new authorities have been essential to be able to do that quickly. So both of those things, I think, point to an important fact, which is prototyping and the ability to do it and then bring in commercial tech is the most important in new tech areas. We got a good way to build tanks in the Army. We're really good at that. The Navy has got their stuff. The Air Force has got their stuff. But new tech, getting that into a system, because it competes with other things, you need
So like
a way to make it
AI or
faster.
quantum or
Yes.
biological things.
Yes. The new stuff needs the help the most through prototyping to show it's real, to build industry interest, and to gain congressional support. That's where it's been the most valuable. It's the new tech, which is, of course, as a lot of people pointed out, where we are struggling.
Yeah.
So it's in the right place.
Which is frankly what the Emerging Technologies Institute is trying to do, is broaden the conversation, educate through podcasts, and then convene industry and government, academia to try to apply some of this. Okay, so the questions are good here. Here's the next one. Many discussions about prototyping use terms like fail fast because iterative learning is thought to be faster. However, funding options and business culture don't always allow this approach, right? We hear about this at SOCOM all the time, fail fast. What can the industry and government customers do to improve this? John.
You know, this is kind of near and dear to my heart, and that fundamentally, there's a sea of great ideas out there. And as all of you know, there's a budget and a country that's got a lot of debt. And so every great idea can't get to the table or get to the warfighter. And that's unfortunate, but that's the reality. So for me, the answer to the question is we really need operators and requirements officials and the acquisition team to line up to prototype for things that we really need, not doing science in a sandbox, even though there's some great ideas out there. And then I think you have a stronger potential for the prototype to have follow-on support and get fielded, or let's be very clear, we're just prototyping to see if this can work, and there's going to be another iterative stage. In both those cases, I think government needs to be clearer with industry because we're frequently asking industry to either possibly make investments, but certainly devote their time and talent to the problem. And not following through is just detrimental. And I've seen a couple of cases where, I mean, in the extreme case, one company that had won a program to build a prototype, did a great job, and then they sat there and watched the service drag their feet for a year. And these smaller companies and these new technology companies, they can't bear that. They need to do something else with their people or follow through. So the government owes the industry side a little more discipline and candor in how we pursue the prototyping.
Okay, so Doug, we're going to turn to you just to reiterate the question. We're talking about funding options and business culture don't always allow the fail fast approach. So what can industry and government customers do to improve this?
Yeah, the first point is the one John just made, which is better comms, telling industry in advance, okay, look, this is a small scale demo to see if this technology is viable in this operational environment. It is not step one on a guaranteed 10-step path to mass production. And they can make a choice whether they want to invest their time and money in that effort. Now, some of those do play out, but industry, the government needs to do a better job of making that clear up front, because from the outside, it can be very opaque, especially if you don't know who the players are. What I found is when we do that, it's just a better conversation with industry. So that's number one. Industry should ask that question too, and it's okay to ask, where's this going? Or, what's the path to production? Which is always the question I would ask my team when they brought me things is this something we're doing to check it out? Or is this like a no kidding, we're going to get to production in a couple, 3 years? Because that industry needs that timeline to be able to, especially if they're deploying their own capital. The other thing is, and this is just the reality of working with the government, people change. People in positions change. And I know this can be maddening to industry. The Army might be all into something because a certain general was there, and all of a sudden the enthusiasm retires. And there's a new general, and they've no longer interested. So I think what that means is, from the outside, but also for acquisition professionals, and I did this, you've got to build internal support, broad support for things. Idiosyncratic things that one person's a fan of, you got to watch out for those because they don't have legs, usually. Building support across multiple people, building your congressional support, making sure you've got people in Congress, staffers who care enough to ask about something. All of these things is how you keep programs alive over time to get to where industry can truly make solid profits in production, which I know is everyone's goal.
Can I add one more thing?
Absolutely.
Neither of us, I think rightly so, are addressing the fail fast thing. Because this is, and let's have some fun here. This is bogus. Who has a fail fast strategy? Because that implies there's a bunch of fail slow strategies. The whole idea of prototyping is to move as quickly as you can. And as I said in the beginning, be deliberate and be sure you're prototyping the right stuff. Otherwise, we get nothing out of it. I think the system has to have a tolerance for failure. and know if it wants to proceed and push through that. But the concept of fail fast or fail slow is kind of irrelevant to the fact that you need to prototype the right stuff and do it quickly as you can. And a lot of people are trying hard to do that.
Yeah, the prototyping authority is critical here because you get more facts that matter because something's done at the right scale or in a quasi-operational environment, not a lab or not PowerPoint. That, and that's not always failing. Sometimes it's
Maybe we
partial.
call it learning quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you learn, okay, this thing is good, except it's got for the UAS, it's really good, except, okay, it can't handle winds above a certain level. And then you decide, is that fixable or do we start over? That kind of learning's good. The Army just did a demo. It was happenstance, although it is kind of the Army, we tend to do things in bad weather. It's just an Army thing. But it was a unmanned system demo thing, and really bad weather the day of the demo flights. Only 2 companies out of 5 could actually fly. Well, that was revealing. And the general in charge said, if you couldn't fly today, we probably don't want your thing. But that's an example of, if you didn't have that event, you wouldn't have that knowledge, and neither would industry. So getting out there and doing it is the advantage of that.
Yeah.
That is our version of failing fast. I just don't like the term either, but it
Well, we'll
accomplishes
talk
the same
about
thing.
learning quickly,
There
and
you
I
go.
think what you're highlighting is how critical it is for the government to communicate, because we tend to have all of these silos of excellence, if you will, but the learning isn't always passed forward to inform all the others. So I think there's an opportunity here as you go through these quick learning cycles, and it's incumbent, frankly, on the government, in my opinion, to make sure this is communicated throughout the military service, the agency across, DOD, but also to industry, so you know where the benchmark is and how to move forward. Okay, so I'm very impressed. Mike McGrath has put his name down. Thank you very much. All right, good question here. Chicken and egg. Should prototypes be based on a validated requirement, or should they inform the development of a requirement? So this is something the Joint Staff has been grappling with, right? We've talked a lot about acquisition reform in the last, 10 years or so. We haven't talked quite as much about requirements reform. However, some of these new acquisition methodologies get at that. So Doug, I'll go down to you first. Based on a validated requirement, or should they inform the requirement?
Yeah, so we're doing, the department's doing both. One of the strengths of the rapid prototyping acquisition pathway is that you don't have to have, at the start, a fully validated JSIDS requirement. Someone asked me one time how I dealt with the JSIDS process, and I said, mostly by just not doing it. Because it has its place, especially for large systems, it has its place. But what we found was that often we didn't know, especially with new tech, we didn't know enough to have a completely thought through detailed requirement up front, but that was okay. Rapid prototyping allowed us to make it more real, get it in the hands of soldiers, do stuff with it, and then refine that requirement before we went to production. Now, my kind of rule when I was there was, before you went to no kidding production, yeah, you needed validated at the right level, whether joint staff or below, you needed a no kidding documented requirement, because you're going to go put a whole bunch of the American people's money on this thing, building it. There better be someone's name on a document saying, I need that.
Yeah.
But before that, I think there's strength in not having the requirements completely figured out. What I found with the Hill was, as long as you explained that's what you were doing, and the amount of money you were putting at risk was deemed reasonable, given the importance of the task, we got away with that in a lot of cases with good comms with the Hill and with our OSD partners. And I think the ability to admit the requirement's not fully baked is that kind of it seems like nothing, but actually is a big step.
Well, I think it's huge. We've talked about that in many different fora. We typically have had a default mechanism in the department of coming up with a ton of KPIs and all these types of things versus saying, here's the warfighting capability gap we have. Tell me how to solve it. And I think there's a very healthy progression to say, tell me how to solve it versus meet these 25 requirements, which may or may not make sense.
Yeah, and I kind of know it was a good thing because of the groups of people it was making crazy. So the requirements industrial complex was sometimes incensed by this fact that the Army wasn't completely sure about the details of a requirement as we were spending, not billions, but sometimes a couple hundred million actually building out a bunch of prototypes, serious prototypes and figuring it out. The other one was the cost estimators, my best friends. But that comfort with uncertainty within reason is more like how industry develops things.
It's experiential learning.
And I think the department has made big steps in getting more comfortable with that. That's become more normal. There's now 10 years, 5 to 10 years worth of acquisition professionals who have done this now, who will keep moving through the system, civilian and military. And I hope that becomes just kind of normal business most of the time. You just got to watch how much money you're putting at risk, but that's an institutional risk judgment that senior leaders have to make.
Yeah. Okay, John, prototyping, validated requirement or developer requirement?
I have a substantial bias here towards letting it be informing of the requirements. And in places where we know roughly what we need, which is usually major platform programs, I'm happy to start with a requirement, but I think, as Ellen pointed out, there's some great places where there's a capability we need that doesn't lend itself perfectly to requirement. And I have a lot of stories here. I have to resist telling you some stories, but the fundamental thing I'd say is I believe, and it wouldn't be shocking to you, the acquisition executive positions are the most important jobs in the building. And they play an important role between balancing the military's desire sometimes for unobtainium and extreme requirements because they want to do the best possible job. But if we can't afford it and we can't build it and we can't buy it, we've not accomplished the goal here. And we do have a role for the president in saying there's finite amount of resources we need to buy somewhere in between. So I always felt it was within my right to question a requirement, and I could tell you several examples of that where I did. I think if you have a requirement, you still need to inform that requirement, and it needs to be adjusted in some cases. In one case, we had a helicopter we developed. It wouldn't meet the requirements by a modest amount, but it was better than anything we had. And so I signed an ADM and bought that helicopter. We need better balance in this space, and I'm pretty much hard over that the requirements team does not know enough about the acquisition world to write a perfect requirement. So I'm going to lean hard towards the informed side, and even when it's written, it needs to be further informed, is my strong opinion.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to do a time check here. How much time do we have left? 15 minutes? All right, good. We're good to go then. All right, so another one here from Glenn Ayers. Are there too many R&D innovation centers and rapid capability offices? Can some be eliminated and consolidated? John, I'll start with you. No pressure.
Oh, yeah, I guess we'll keep having fun here. In my recent experience, there is an amazing amount of money in the Pentagon and an amazing number of offices. And they all have a great story of how they're coordinated and tied together with each other or with a warfighter or something. But I think we have a little too much Wild West out there, to be honest with you. And there needs to be a little more discipline, and there are people prototyping things for which they haven't worked through those operational concepts. The services, this will be shocking to all of you, are happy to see OSD spend its money down these different places where they don't have to spend money. Sometimes they're willing even to buy in and cost share a little bit because they get more money for their dollar. But even the services have gotten a little broader here and experimenting in different places and not tying back to everything we need. I'm not saying we need to just wholesale wipe it out, but I think there is definitely room for rationalizing some of these seed offices that have generated themselves.
Thoughts, Doug?
Yeah, completely agree. But it's a balance. You want some, having the occasional small rogue entity with a little money to do the nutty thing that no one else will is not always a bad thing. It's a question of how many and what scale of dollars. I think there and it's not bad, over a couple administrations, these things have grown because of kind of a demand and concern that we weren't pushing fast enough in certain tech areas. That's the organization, the department responding, I think, in the right way to a perceived need to support our troops. At the same time, it's probably reasonable for this administration to consider looking across that and doing a little bit of consolidation wouldn't be the worst thing, but not too far. Because once you put everything inside a big agency or something like that, those offices now spend more and more of their time not doing the creative thinking and prototyping, but like, frankly, filling out TPS reports for their higher headquarters. It's just the nature of, it's just how bureaucracies work, and it just is. Organizations do that. So we need a thoughtful review. I think I would look first at frankly, the OSD entities, because there's a whole bunch of them with a whole bunch of money. You could maybe save some money there and then reallocate it to other things in the services, for example, that also have merit. But John's right that over the last probably 10 years, everybody's just added the word innovation to their organization's title in the hopes of getting money in the budget. So there does need to be a little trimming. Yeah.
Let's talk about what's fundamentally behind this question and this discussion. And that is that a lot of experts who've never spent time in acquisition are convinced that this is the way to solve it by creating all these satellite offices. Because so underlying this fundamentally is an idea that the acquisition team can't do what they need to do and they do it badly. And so I can't agree with that because I've had a lot of people do great things. They don't own the budget, they don't own the requirements, and we still get asked to deliver X, Y, and Z. And so if some of this reform ought to be on the operational requirement side. Tell the acquisition team what you want and actually give them some dollars to go do it. And I'm pretty convinced people will go and do these things quickly and responsively. If you don't give them the dollars and the opportunity, you can set up this little office and it'll go do something for you, but I don't know if it'll be tied to the infrastructure. But if we think part of maybe rationalize this is we need the acquisition team to be more responsive, but we need to give them a chance to be more responsive.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is that we are overly constraining the acquisition workforce by overly constraining the requirements and telling them what to do and how to do it versus, again, talk about a gap in capability that needs to be filled. So it's a continuum, right? You've got to have the requirements, you've got to have the people that can go and execute. I think there's also a little bit of an elephant in the room here in terms of you talk about all these different individual offices that have flexibility, moving fast and so forth and so on. It begs the question of why aren't the larger, what I'll call traditional acquisition organizations adapting the same behaviors and becoming more flexible? Do they have the motivations and the rewards to do so? Do they have the leadership that's really requiring them to do that? Why do we need all of these Band-Aids, if you will, especially since, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, it was government that was funding most of the innovation. Now we have the inverse. It is industry funding most of the innovation, yet we're still behaving the same way. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity here. Okay. A black screen. Hold on. We do have the technology to bring it back. Yes, there is a God. Okay. Jeff Snyder, there seems to be a lot of duplication across services and within services, leading to a dilution of funding. What would you suggest the DoD could do to focus prototyping DoD-wide? Doug?
So a byproduct of giving the services more flexibility, rapid prototyping, has been, in some cases, the services doing, not always duplicative, but close. Like if you squint, kind of looks like the same thing. I mean, believe me, in my 4 years, if there's one failing I had many, but one of them was we worked very closely with the Marine Corps on a lot of things, but there were a lot of opportunities, because we both do land stuff, to be closer together on having joint systems. So, but at the same time, when we try to do joint systems, sometimes it ends up inhibiting the thing you were seeking. I mean, it might end up with a cool joint thing, but, and we do have some, and we have some very successful ones. But they can add time and process just because now there's two entire services involved. So there's a bit of a disincentive to do it. So you do end up with some duplication.
It's that old joint thing, right?
Yeah.
Sounds good, but
Sounds good till you got to do it. Yeah. But there have been some notable successes. What I've found, one way we found to try to get to avoid that is to do joint programs without the kind of formal joint overhead. The Army's hypersonic missile is effectively a joint program with the Navy. The Navy had a thing. The Army, instead of doing its whole brand new missile, is working with the Navy on taking advantage of their development to do the long-range hypersonic weapon. It was never formally made a joint program, but it was managed like a joint program with 2-3 stars running it. And that's been a big success. So there's ways to do that. I think the services inherently, though, get a little nervous with a formal joint architecture on a service because of the time and complications it can add to try to do, especially trying to do something quick. My last thing on duplication, it's not always bad. So sometimes it's okay that the Army went a certain way with something and the Marines went a different way with a different tech solution to the same problem, because that way really we've made two bets. And if one doesn't work out, we've got another one that might play out. So it's a question of how much money went into those two things. You've also built two industrial partners, which is also good, rather than having just one point of
yeah,
failure.
you're spreading
perhaps.
risk and maybe multiplying the opportunity.
So I'd say, I guess the big answer would be duplication is not always bad, but you've got to look for those places where you can be more efficient and save the American people's money and exploit those, especially on bigger systems, is where you can get kind of the economy of scale on a joint program that makes it truly more efficient than otherwise.
And it comes back to communication as well, learning one from the other. So John, your perspective?
Yeah, I think because I started with this and believing in competitive prototyping, I'm not generally going to feel that there's excessive amount of prototyping out there, nor am I averse to multiple services prototyping the same thing and comparing. Because I agree with everything Doug said. There is a benefit in diversity, and there's a benefit in that industrial base, and there's a benefit in moving that technology forward. The hard decisions that need to be made, and this is a role OSD ought to play better, is when it's time to move to bigger money and procurement and fielding, do we need two different systems and two different services?
Yeah.
Or should we achieve the benefit of a single system in both services and the cost and quantity benefits? And then you have the opportunities to talk about dual sourcing it and things like that. Those are where I think the harder decisions and the more careful thoughts need to be applied. But at the early stage, I think we should be able to afford, and we need, for industrial base and creativity and the fact that our adversaries move quickly to accept and endure, possibly, I'll use Doug's word, some duplicative prototyping, because I'm not uncomfortable with it.
Yeah, this kind of leads into another question here, and I'll come back to you, John. This is an anonymous. If a program fails to meet a certain requirement continuously, what is the process for off-ramping that program? At what stage does prototyping become unsustainable? So it gets into a little bit of a lexicon issue here, I think, but
Yeah, and I'm going to stick with what I said. I mean, first, if it's continually missing that requirement, I got to test the requirement and see whether it's really needed by the warfighter and if it's a valid requirement, and then if technology's not supporting that requirement, because then I might need to call it back. I think the other side of that's pretty easy. I mean, if this is all rational, it's what we need, and a company can't meet it, then we ought to kill the prototype. That's the whole benefit of prototyping, is that we can go a little ways, see if it's viable, and kill it. So they probably have a more specific example in mind, but my view is that this is it leads to a question about the requirement, or it leads to a question about the company.
yeah, and know when to kill it, I guess, is when you're out of time or you just can't do it. Doug?
Yeah, the hardest thing, and the hardest thing in my 4 years, was knowing that point. So you can pretty easily, because you want something to succeed, talk yourself into endlessly funding it. But knowing when to pull the plug on something is some of the hardest judgments you make. They're really not acquisition decision. They're kind of corporate service decisions. Requirements folks get a vote. Of course, senior leaders, when it's serious dollars, get a vote. But sometimes you have to in order to fund other things that have more promise. But it's never an easy call because we all want our stuff to succeed. I think just having, though, enough talent in the government from a technology standpoint to make that evaluation and not just be told what to think by industry. This is where having that expertise resident in the government to make
Smart
those hard
buyers,
calls.
right?
Yeah, and the services, when we did it well, we also had help and collaboration with our friends at OSD because a lot of that expertise lives there as well, and they're a little less biased and, they're not as bought in, which is good. So you need some outside help also to make those kind of decisions. And the last one I mentioned is, frankly, Congress has a big role here. If Congress loses faith in something and they make that very clear to us through the many ways they have to do that, that definitely affects services' views on whether to move on to something else or keep going.
All right, so we're just about out of time. We're going to do one quick round here. If there is one thought, that means like one sentence, that you want to leave this audience with in terms of something DOD or Congress could do to help effective prototyping, what would it be? I'll start with you, John.
Ellen was kind enough to say this might be one of the things we talk about. My quick answer to that is program managers in today's environment need significantly more accountability. They need to feel they own the program and they need to be accountable for it. And sometimes they may not succeed and they may have to change jobs. But in conjunction with that, they need more authority to execute. We need better contracting officers and contractor officers who try to do what the program manager wants done and telling the program manager what he can't do. So we've got to better empower these program managers to get their jobs done and then hold them accountable.
Yeah, and I think they need to be rewarded as well, in addition to being trained, because we have a lot of people that just don't have the fundamentals and are put in a difficult position. All right, Doug?
Yeah, so there's two big entities that oversee the services. One is, of course, OSD. The other one is Congress, who have made it very clear they want the military services to take more risks, to try more cutting-edge things, to do more prototyping, for example, at scale. When some of those don't work out, how those entities respond is critical. If they respond with punishment and retribution, frankly, you are conditioning the services to not do that. So even though there's got to be, if you want people to take risk, those two oversight entities have to be not blind, okay, and not standing idle while money is wasted, perhaps, but also not punishing organizations that take reasonable, thoughtful risks, not unlimited risks, not irresponsible risks. There's got to be a reward system for that, and often that is letting something continue maybe in a different way, change contractors, do another round of prototyping without coming in and just destroying it. So that organizational tolerance outside of the services, certainly outside of acquisition, for failures if you're prototyping something hard will be critical. I will say that early returns on that in my 4 years are actually pretty good. In a lot of cases, Congress and OSD, when we went and told them, you told us to try to be cutting edge, you told us to, in this tech area especially, take risks. We did that. It didn't work out. We've got a new path forward. Please don't kill us. Actually, most of the time they didn't. So I think there is hope as long as the comms are good, because ultimately OSD and the Congress control the funding.
Okay, so good communications lead to hope for all of us. Thank you to the audience, and especially thank you to both of my colleagues here.
All right, thanks, Ellen and John and Doug, for that very, very practical conversation. Way more practical than anything you ever did in testimony for us. That was really great. So appreciate you all coming
Thank
today.
you.
See you again.